everybody. Welcome to Future of Beauty Unfiltered. I am your host, Hannah Cook, Head of Growth and Innovation. And today we are joined by the amazing Susan, co-founder and Chief Brand Officer of Here We Flo, to talk all about life's messy moments. Now, Here We Flo, for anyone that doesn't know, is a rapidly growing B Corp with big ambitions and an impressive roster of advisors and investors. From the likes of Grays, Charlotte Tilbury, Unilever, L'Oreal, Marks and Spencers, and so much more. Now, today we have the amazing Susan Allen joining us, and I'm going to go do a little bit of a shameless bio because she is such an impressive woman when it comes to her background. Now, Susan grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and received her BA in Communications and Legal Studies from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. After 3 years at healthcare policy nonprofit in Boston, she moved to New York City to join George Soros's philanthropy, the Open Society Foundations. While working there, Susan completed her master's degree in management at the London School of Economics in 2015, where she then relocated to London permanently to lead the foundation's work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. After Susan met her business partner, Tara Chandra, the two launched Here We Flo with a Kickstarter campaign in 2017, and the brand has been shaking up the personal care category ever since, with a purpose-driven, sustainable period care and sexual wellness range that offers shamelessly natural care for life's messiest moments. Here We Flo is on a mission to challenge shame and disrupt the period, bladder, and sexual wellness markets with organic and vegan products, including tampons, pads, reusable period underwear, condoms, and more. Welcome, Susan. Thank you so much for joining.
For having me.
I loved talking to you before we actually came onto the podcast. Just about, well, firstly, incontinence, which I'm really keen to talk about. You know, we talk a lot here at Pull about menopause, women's health, and actually female empowerment. But what I really loved was this kind of ethos around life's messy moments. And actually, it's a really fun, freeing way to talk about these sometimes what can be uncomfortable topics for consumers. So it's safe to say that you and Tara are set out to really create a dialogue that makes a difference when it comes to those messy moments in life. What was actually the pivotal point? So obviously you met Tara, but there must have been something that led to you wanting to do this.
Yes. So we met at the LSC. We fell in best friend love basically right away. And as you shared our backgrounds, it was not in business. Tara had studied economics at Columbia and was working in the music business. So
Oh, wow.
nothing to do with consumer products or anything like that. But I was feeling really inspired by our business classes. We were going to the Louvre together in between class, as one does. And I was just like, we should start a business. We should start the feminist mafia. And she's like, absolutely. You know, she's another happy hipster from California. So she was like, absolutely, we'll always start a feminist mafia. What is our business going to be about? What's the moneymaker? And, you know, she couldn't find organic tampons. She's like, I have to go to specialty health shops to get that. It shouldn't be that way. You can get organic apples, plant-based milks, all these things at an off license at your local grocer. And these products are even more important because it's for our intimate health. We should have options that are sustainable, better for our bodies, better for the planet. And we're both brandaholics. So we wanted something that had a great brand that was sort of had the tone of voice like we were having the conversation in the bathrooms. And we sort of cared about these topics because as we were doing the research for the business case in school, we found that although they were sort of like hush-hush topics, once you did focus groups and got a group of women and people, period, in a room to talk about it, they couldn't stop talking. I mean, we were there to talk about tampons, but then we talked about bladder leaks and sex and lubes and all these different things. And so we found like what was really needed was a conversation about it, and that there was an opportunity beyond the sort of like environmental change and the health benefits of using organic products. There was an opportunity to sort of create conversation and dispel some of that stigma and shame that surround all of these all of these categories.
So this is going to sound like a really stupid question, but I love asking the stupid questions on this podcast. Why is it better for you to have organic tampons? What's the difference? Yes.
So with a tampon, your vagina is one of the most absorbent places in your body. And while you would think the average conventional tampon is made from cotton because it's bleached white and it looks like it, it's actually made from synthetic materials like rayon.
Wow.
And those materials can shed just in the same way that a sweater or a polyester shirt that you own can shed. They shed and can leave those sheddings behind when you remove the tampon. And that's part of what causes toxic shock syndrome is it causes micro tears and then produces opportunity for infection. So when you use our tampons are made from organic cotton, cotton sort of like closes in on itself when it gets wet
Mhm.
versus, the
Expanding.
materials expanding, exactly. And then those materials are also bleached when, create dioxins and all these different chemicals that
Yeah.
good for you and are again in this absorbent part of your body, whereas the cotton is just cleaned with oxygen. And so it's just a purer, more comfortable experience. You get different performance, so it's not going to be as absorbent because it is a different material, but it's much better for you and it gives you a much better sort of user experience. Because I know if you've ever used sort of the wrong absorbency and then you have to remove
Oh,
it
God,
and
the
it's
rip. Oh,
Velcro. Yeah. Yeah,
mm.
yeah, yeah. It's not great.
No
Um,
one can see us right now, but I'm definitely cringing. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes.
and so that's the tampons, and then for the pads, again, that's outside, but when you use a pad and it feels a bit like a nappy, like our pads are made from bamboo and corn fiber, and so those are materials that are much more sustainable. And when they get wet, rather than expanding in the way those materials do, they sort of stay flat. And so you have a flatter pad. It feels, we have customers describe it as a cloud in their pants.
Oh,
And so that's where people are most obsessed. That's in general, the sort of period care market is like 70% pads and liners. Those
yeah.
are bestsellers and incredible.
It's, I mean, thank you. I mean, it's amazing when you start going into the detail of something that women have to start using at a young age in the grand scheme of their life, and actually the education around what happens. I think this is the first time I've ever had a conversation with someone where they've actually said, by the way, this is what happens when you use a kind of modern day non-organic tampon. And you use hundreds of them in your lifetime. It's not a very sustainable type of product. It's unfortunately, there are alternatives out there where you can, reuse things and wash them. Like that's why I think underwear has been kind of a real game changer when it comes to sustainability because you have the
11 to
ability.
12,000 in your lifetime, actually.
Is that how many you use? Shoosh, per
Yeah.
woman. That is madness. And that's, ugh. And just think they're all getting thrown away.
Yeah.
It's just awful. I mean, that's crazy.
And so
I've
that's
kind of,
what we wanted to change in terms of sustainability, where our products will biodegrade in 5 years. Those tampons that were made from plastic, essentially hundreds of
don't.
years to
That
biodegrade.
I know, and they're just put in landfills and oh God, that's really mad. And I think that's the thing. Some of that dialogue, there's so much. While there's a lot of dialogue going out there at the moment, the education actually just for general everyday consumers, it's not there. Even when you talk about sexual health in schools, you
Yeah.
aren't having these types of conversations. But I think that's for lots of reasons, and one of which is the social stigma
Mhm.
around that. So you were saying about how you started asking people questions and doing kind of consumer research. And once one person started talking about it, everybody opens up. And I think you do find that with women. I mean, I know I've had in my working life some scenarios where I've had an accident or whatever and been caught off guard. And I kind of don't really care, so I just frog much in and go, are any of the women in here have any kind of Tampax or anything like that? And you watch all the men kind of recoil, and I'm like, oh, get over it. But I'm probably one of the exceptions to that, and that's not typically how a lot of people feel. So let's talk about shy buys.
Hmm.
So we've spoken a few times about shy buys, and this doesn't really just apply to sanitary towels. So, as a brand, Here We Flo is more than just period pads. So, do you want to talk a little bit about Glow and XO for a sec, and then we'll go and actually talk a bit more about shy buying?
Yes, so Glow is our sensitive bladder line, which was inspired by my own experience after I had my first child. And Tara and I were chatting as we're always chatting, and I'm like, I could have used a wee bit of protection. We love a good like pun. At Here We Flo, and so we looked into it. And so when we're considering how we extend the line, we always look for things that have that stigma or shame around them, that can use some kind of innovation or glow up in terms of branding, and that we can bring a more sustainability to the category. And as it is, it's sort of owned by two major corporate brands, and they own the entire incontinence aisle. In doing the research for sort of like the customer need, we found that like it's like 36% of women experience incontinence or bladder weakness reported to the NHS. And so if that many have reported it, then you know there's way more that aren't reporting it and are just sort of like suffering silently. And so we just, again, just as we had done with period care, wanted to produce a sustainable swap for them to use. And it's a great product for when folks are pregnant or not using or if they're aging out of menstruation. Like it's a great transition product for that. And then XO is our sexual wellness line, which we love to talk about, Henry. So we found here that even though I think it's 49% of men purchase condoms, 38% of women purchase condoms, but almost all of the sort of advertising and marketing is towards heterosexual men. And so we wanted to create an inclusive product that is just for people who have sex. The tagline is sex just got better. In terms of sustainability, I think this is our most sustainable product. So it uses a higher standard than fair trade. We're one of the pioneers of the regenerative rubber initiative, and they work directly, like our manufacturer works directly with the rubber farmers. There's 3 collection points to sort of reduce the impact on the environment. Rather than just being grown in rows and rows of rubber trees, it's grown in an agroforestry system with other symbiotic plants. And then it is brought to the solar powered factory in Malaysia, where it is then produced. And in addition to that, we work with a climate partner to then carbon offset. So when you get an XO product, you can scan and see which of the sustainable development goals you're supporting with your purchase. So and we don't have it in the UK yet, but in the US we also have our Naughty by Nature lubricant, and it is an organic and vegan lube that is selling very well in Whole Foods over in the US, where we're with full chain. And so again, it's just trying to break the stigma in these categories. And it's so interesting, I think, especially in the US, there's so much stigma around it that you can't even advertise or do like end caps and things in stores. When you talk about you can sort of talk about sexual wellness in like STI protection, but
Mm,
you can't talk about lube because that's about like women's pleasure.
mm.
It's so interesting about how these things. So it's all seeded by the patriarchy, which is why we say we're a funny, feminist, and fierce brand, and really trying to challenge these structures that are creating the environment for the shame and stigma that surround them.
Do you see a difference in attitudes between the US and the UK markets?
Yes, yes. So I think the US was probably a bit more open around periods Just because it's really strange. They're like prudish around sex, but more explicit. So you'll have like a half naked woman advertising soap or a car, but we
Yeah.
don't talk about sex. Whereas like you come to the UK, and I remember when I moved over here, it was so shocking, that show where people are just it's like naked attraction. Well, I'm like, these people are just naked at
I know.
9 o'clock at night. So so I think
That show slays me every time. I have this question. A lot of shift workers watch it because obviously it's normally played at anti times. And I'll say, would you ever go on it? And they're like, not in a million years. And yet this show has been going on for years. It makes no sense. No sense.
so yeah, I mean something like that we wouldn't fly in the US, but I think around other categories they're a bit more open. But here in the UK it was really the drive against single-use plastic that I think opened up the conversation around periods, as well as then people sort of taking note of period poverty, thinking that it was something that was only happening in like third world countries, and realizing like no, right here in the UK, there are little girls who can't go to school when they're on their period because they don't have products. They don't have period products.
It's a real there's a lot of things, even just women's health in general. I was talking to Tina Backhouse from Theramex the other day, who really flies the flag at Parliament whenever she gets the opportunity to eat a politician for breakfast. She does. All around, actually, that we are the majority. There's 51% women in this country, and yet there are so many things about our sexual health that one we don't have control over.
Mhm.
No one wants to have a period. They're not really pleasant experiences a lot of the time. They happen to us rather than something we choose to have, and yet there's very little support or education around the best ways to manage those, and actually even lifestyles that can help support less painful periods. And I think, that's what you guys are really doing that I love is changing that narrative. I mentioned shy buys. The one thing I've noticed, so we rewind many, many, many years to when I used to work in Boots as a Saturday girl.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, I obviously, as part of my job, would sell packs of condoms and incontinence pads and tampons and towels and everything else. And for me, it was just a product with a barcode. And but what used to make me uncomfortable was watching how uncomfortable the
Mhm.
other person was. And we always knew that someone was going to be trying to buy some condoms or something else if they were lingering in that section for a little bit too long, waited for no one to be there, and then kind of made the dash to the till. And actually, there still is this stigma, and people are uncomfortable about buying these products. I mean, look at incontinence for an example. I think half the problem with some of these products is that they're quite pharma, and they're quite medical in the way in which they look, and therefore it's very obvious very quickly when you look at the packaging what they are. And the reality is, you don't want to announce to everyone and their dog that you're having incontinence issues. I cannot, the amount of friends that have entered an age of life where they're buying them for their grandparents and they feel they have to announce, oh, it's not for me.
Yeah.
At checkout point. Like, why do you think that is? Why is shy buying such a thing when it comes to these types of products?
I just think there's so much and so when we talk about that, like I say that I think it's a simple thing, and it's this like shame and behavior, even just purchasing. And I it used to make me laugh. I remember this was how I knew one of my best male friends back home was actually my best friend, because we were out drinking and my period came on and I had to send him out to the store to get me tampons. But it's like, dude, no one's gonna think it's for you because it's a tampon. Like, what is this? But even for that, I'm like, I have such like clear memories of like my friends, like they would run away, a boy would run away from you if you just pulled out a tampon, like from the pack, not a not a used
Mm.
tampon, like just a tampon in the wrapper, and they would run away like it was a bomb. It's so it starts there, and it seems simple and silly, but where we're coming back to women's health issues where people are suffering with PCOS and endometriosis and they're in severe pain, but because we can't even have the conversation, you don't know what is a normal experience, right? And it's doctors will just so many of my friends, it's like they were having an issue and it's like, right, we'll just put you on birth control. So some of my friends were on birth control from 13 years old. And that's not a solution. It's like, I'm experiencing something, let's investigate that. It's like, no, no, just take this and that'll sort you out. And it's feeling empowered. So that's like our mission is for people to feel crazy confident and empowered about their messiest moments so that you're able to advocate for yourself, whether that's at the doctor, if it's in the store. You shouldn't be carrying around this shame about something that's totally natural. As you said, we don't have a choice in this, it happens. And I don't think there's anything that men experience where they're worried about in this way, how much time it sort of like occupies our mind on hiding these things. So I think it's like it's those early things, it's the language we use where we can't just say vagina or vulva, we're using other strange euphemisms for it, that then sort of translates and builds up to this thing where it's like you're running around trying to hide things in the basket and going to the trash.
Yeah, it is hard as well. It's really difficult, isn't it, of finding that balance. I think as well, like you don't know what you don't know. You know, when you're a younger girl and I mean, I remember when I first came on my period, I was in a swimming pool with my dad in a bright yellow cozy. It was Guildford Spectrum, and every time I go there, I sit with my son and I go, I had my first period here, and he looks at me as if like, why is this relevant? But to me, it was very relevant,
Yeah.
because I didn't have a female there to go, what do I do? And I think because we don't have those conversations, a lot of young girls do experience that. I mean, actually, it's been proven now that some of the most extreme period pains are comparable to a heart attack
Mhm.
level wise. And yet we're expecting women to sit there in an office, in work, on
Just
their
crack on.
feet.
It's fine.
Yeah, get on with it. You know, we call it, so like one of the nicknames they call it is a flower. That thing is not a flower, it's a machine. It pushes babies out of it and it deals with pain on regular basis. Like women really do go through a lot. Um, do you think that the same social stigmas apply to female incontinence and women's sexual health as they do kind of periods and things like that? You know, if so, what are they and how do you think they need to change?
So I think periods are improving for all the reasons. And it's really the conversation has opened up and it's about education and just the repetition of hearing about it sort of like takes away that stigma. I'm sure there's still lots of men who cringe. We
100%.
we saw that when we did our No More Period Dramas ad, which was like it was a spoof on Bridgerton with people in fancy dress talking about periods at the dinner table. And we got emails in that was like, "Dear sirs, this is the worst ad I've in the history of television. I'm expecting your response, John." Like it's, it was really funny. So we sort of like took the piss out of it on our socials and stuff. But it's going to be uncomfortable for some people. I think there's a generational thing there. But our main audience is really that sort of like Gen Zennial, 34 and younger is our key demographic, and they don't have patience for any of this. They're just open, they're honest, they're fully inclusive, like they care about sustainability, they're really passionate about values-driven brands, and they are such amazing advocates and yeah, for these causes and anything that they feel isn't right. And so I think that generation is going to really shake up and change things. It on all of these topics, and obviously the periods is one that they're experiencing, but when they get to incontinence, the change is coming there as well. And I think I know there's a lot of criticism that like millennials and Gen X, well, I think Gen X has for them. Millennials are just sort of like, we paved the way for you guys. So you
100. I was just about to say that everyone ignores millennials, but for me, I'm like they're the badasses that actually did something about it.
we
Absolutely.
walk so you can run, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I
but
only say that because I'm a millennial. I say it to my sister all the time. I'm like, listen here, you.
But it's like it's so there's like the shared criticism across the generations, but I also think that there's inspiration that can be taken from Gen Z for their bravery and sort of the no nonsense way that they're having the standards that they've set. That it's not too late for like Gen X
Mm,
and millennials to be like, well, we want
mm.
different too, and that's
I
what
mean,
it's going to take.
yeah, I think I mean we've obviously done a lot of research in this area, and I do think that Gen X in particular, they are no nonsense. And but they're at a stage in their life where periods aren't really the priority because they typically aren't really having
Mhm.
them. So it's kind of
Yeah.
more, menopause is they're still fighting the battles that Gen Z, sorry, are fighting. But they're different. They're
Yeah.
different things. And I think that's where sometimes Gen X gets a bad rep, is that actually they're very vocal, and we're definitely seeing this fight for menopause. So you've kind of got these powerhouses either side where you've kind of got Gen Z fighting for sexual health and period awareness, and kind of, no, guys, we're not going to pretend that this isn't happening anymore, because this is something that happens to us every month and it is very painful and uncomfortable at times. And then you've got kind of Gen X going, hey, we aren't past it yet. We're
Yeah.
still here, we're still strong, but actually we're experiencing things in a different way. And I think, incontinence is definitely something that kind of is moving in. I think, a lot of things that happen in life, it's all about age and stage. Like with you, I definitely experienced a different mindset when it came to my kind of sexual health and everything else down there once I'd had a child. You get very nervous, and then as soon as you have a child, you're like, well, everyone and their dog saw it during that
Yeah.
process, so I don't really care anymore.
I'm not the same about anything now.
You're like, oh, one more person to come in? Yeah, come on in. But like, I think sexual health is definitely, particularly women's sexual health, is something that is still not quite there. There's a lot of influencers that have kind of taken more of a stance to actually go, no, I am going to be promoting sexual health, particularly women's pleasure.
Mhm.
I think that's definitely something that for some reason is a taboo topic. And there's so many women going, well, hold on a minute. Why is it okay for men to be pleased in this experience and women, and it's the patriarchy. There's so much. I mean, we have these conversations. We're kind of having this conversation soon with our research that we're doing. But I think there's double standards in every single category. But these definitely feel like they are still lingering taboos, and it's taking a much longer time for women to change that narrative in the sexual health side. Um, do you think that women need to be changing it, or men? Like, if when it comes to kind of that,
Yeah,
where do you start?
it I think it has to be meant, and that's why with the EXO line, we made it for humans to have sex because there's a whole like LGBTQ community that's being ignored.
My brain just went to a really dark place. Just humans, okay, guys?
Yeah,
Just humans to have sex. Let's make it really clear.
it's no, but it's like I think it's just so much to unpack, right? Because if it's
Yeah.
like if if straight men own they can are the only ones that can have pleasure, that can speak about pleasure. For women to try, you're like trying to pull that ownership. It's much easier if they just relinquish it and we have a conversation about it. And actually, if your partner's having a good time, the sex will be better for everyone. One
And
would
also, the
think.
reality is, the other person always wants their partner to have a good time because it makes them feel better about themselves as well. You know, I think that's half of the issue. You were talking about adverts and things out in the States. A real bugbear of mine is the perfume, the fragrance category at the moment. Every advert, they're naked. You like spritz yourself once and then that's it. Everyone's ready for you. The clothes are gone. That's what fragrance does now, guys. It takes all your clothes off. And actually, it's the same. Whereas this kind of, I think, even when you look back at some of the Tampax adverts and things over the years, Mother Nature comes along and she's the baddie, and it's this person, and it's like, oh no, actually, it's part of life. Let's talk period pants a little bit, because it's such a big kind of range for you guys. Over the last 18 months, period knickers have really taken a life of their own. I think it's taken a while for people to kind of try it. I mean, me personally, same thing. For a while, I was like, I don't know if it's the right thing for me. It always used to kind of, you'd said about people feeling like they're wearing nappies.
Mm.
Um, I remember as a child in the car getting really distressed because I had a pad on and I was sat in this car on this long journey and I'm fidgeting and I'm getting really, really wound up. And my mum was like, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "I feel like I've wet myself. I feel like I'm in a nappy and I'm so uncomfortable." And when period knickers came along, I thought I'll give it a go. And I was like, why have I not done this sooner? I feel like an idiot. And actually, they've really taken a life of their own in the market with more women kind of converting over to it as an alternative to tampons or pads than ever before. Why do you think that is?
So they are really popular again with sort of like the Gen Zennial, a much easier user experience for Gen Alpha. And we're seeing younger and younger people perioding from like age 8, right? And so can you
Wow.
imagine, like, I'm not sure even like my
That's
daughter
two
is.
years older than my son. What?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so um that's something that's easier. It's like you put these on, you can take an extra pair with you to school, have a little baggie that you put it in, and then you can just change it. So I think the appeal of it works really well. I think lots of people sort of have the worries that you had, but then once you try them, because we see those comments at the bottom of our ads, and we're like, actually, it has these 3 layers, one of them is wicking, but like give it a try and see how you like it. It's much more environmentally friendly, right? It requires a bigger investment up front than, buying a box of pads or tampons, but I think it will change your life. Like I'm obsessed with them. Um,
It's not just that, it's actually there's other little things that you don't think about with period knickers, which is that sense of comfort and warmth because of the fabrics and the way in which they have to be created. You actually kind of get pulled in a little bit, and there's nothing better than when you're really uncomfortable to have that additional warmth and support
yeah.
in that kind of area in general. So there's something quite comforting about them. I think a lot of the time, people either love or hate reusable nappies, towel nappies. And I think that's kind of psychologically something that people have had to try and get over for a while as well with those knickers. What just going back to some of kind of the data that you've seen then, so as young as 8 kind of experiencing, has there any other kind of changes or anything that surprised you in what you've seen when it comes to kind of people coming into an age with periods nowadays?
So I think that because there's more education around periods, I think people are recognizing the symptoms of PCOS or endometriosis much earlier on. And I
Mm,
think in general, Gen Z has really rejected the use of hormonal birth control and they're wanting to do more natural things. And so that's no longer an acceptable solution
mm.
for it. And they're talking to their younger cousins and their younger siblings. So I think the open communication is being passed down at a much earlier age than like we would have experienced when we had our periods. Uh,
Hmm.
and so a more educated consumer is just demanding different things. And once those demands are out there, then the consumer markets have to react to that.
What about incontinence? Is there anything you're seeing there that's changing? Because it's a very different audience.
It's much more slow. Like there's still so much stigma around it. I think it's coming. I think along with, like you were saying, around menopause, I am hearing a lot more about menopause. And I think part of it is sort of like Gen X millennials are then aging into it and being
Mm.
like, what is this? Because think about what you'd heard about menopause. It's like hot flashes is all anyone would talk about. But there's like so many other
Like
symptoms.
50 signs and
Oh,
symptoms
wait,
of
and then like
menopause.
perimenopause. Forget like my sister's going through that now, and I have
Yeah.
another friend that's going through it, and it's like they just don't know. Like you go to the doctor and they don't even know what they're supposed to tell you about it because in general it's like a lack of research. I think the broader community, the broader sort of like conversation around women's health, you're then saying, oh, well, actually, all these medical studies that we've just been accepting as gospel were all done on like men. So we don't know how it applies to women. Actually, women should take more ibuprofen because we need more. We feel pain in a different way than men do. But all the testing and the clinical testing was all done on men. And then we just take that and let's apply it to everyone. So I think that's the other power about having these larger conversations is like challenging these things that we've just accepted
Mm.
as truth for a long time, so that we can have a better experience in managing our health.
I think we're definitely at a stage where consumers are actually turning around and putting more pressure on governments and pharmaceutical companies to say, go back to the drawing board. Things have changed, therefore we want to see things done differently. And when they're not listening, there's brands like yourself that are going, well, we're going to take matters into our own hands. And actually more and more people are striving for that. What's been the most surprising piece of feedback or shopper habit when it comes to all three of your brands, Flow, Glow, and XO, have you seen?
Hmm. Surprising. Um, I think it's something that's always interesting is when we'll have like sort of millennial or Gen X moms that are buying for their daughters, that they are obviously they want the best for their children. So they'll buy us, but they'll just like, I'm nearly done with my period. Like I've been using whatever brand for whatever. And so that's something that's really interesting about the category is like women's brand loyalty. And
It's like
that
the damage is done mindset, so I won't bother.
I'm not saying this. I'm used to this now, but I really want this better experience for my daughter. And they don't only, of course, they like it because it's organic and it's the plant-based materials. But they also love the sort of like empowerment conversation that's happening around it. And then for their sort of like teenagers, have such an incredible like impact and influence on household purchasing. So sometimes they're buying it because their teenage daughter has said, "Well, I'm not going to use this. I'm not going to use Tampax. I want something organic." Because they care about sustainability, actually. So it's interesting how the different interests sort of like converge and influence the purchasing decisions and explain sort of like the behavior of companies for the last 50 years and why they always targeted like very young girls in school, why you get those free samples in school and all of those things, because then you're locked in and you buy that for the next 30, 40 years, right?
Do
Um,
you do you think it is sustainability that drives them, or is it more they're far more aware than ever about what goes into their bodies? They're just more educated in general.
so for which generations?
Well, Gen Z for you is for
Yeah.
you guys.
So they don't, they're not really driven by organic. Like, of course, they want something good for their bodies, but I think the awareness of the climate crisis is so
Mm,
prominent for them that that's really what will drive their decision. Like, they'll write in and it's like just making sure that we're not testing on animals to understand. Like, some people write in and they're like, how do I compost? Like, they really care about the sustainability aspects of it,
really?
much more than any other generation. Yeah, it's really quite interesting. Whereas like millennials, the push was much more around organic and the use of materials that were better as sort of like a health conscious purchasing
Mm,
decision. But I say across all of these things, if your product doesn't work, then no, you're not having the conversation at all. So we've
totally.
really had to balance that efficacy along with sustainability of the products.
That's what we're seeing across the board is efficacy is the number one thing anyone cares about nowadays because everything is expensive, and therefore they're like, I'm happy to invest and I'm happy to pay more if I know it's going to work and do all of the other things that I want it to do. Um, Retailers have really jumped on kind of the underwear, the period knickers, and kind of the sustainable side. They're actually sold, M&S next. Everyone's starting to bring out their own brands as well. Where do you think it's going to go next? Is it still focused on sustainability? Are there going to be other areas where people are wanting to see it?
So I think it's it'll be interesting. So we're the thing with innovation, what we found even with our early research is people don't want a lot of innovation in period care. Like just giving them that sustainable swap is enough. I think period pants were interesting because um as we said, it sort of dealt with a problem that people didn't think there was a solution for, but it's still very difficult for people who have heavier periods to use period pants because they bleed through them so quickly.
Mm.
So there's still a sort of a segment of the population that they won't work for, that they'll need to use with a tampon or something additional.
Like
Um,
menstrual cups is something that I think people have kind of it's kind of gone up and then it's gone down again and it's not really gone anywhere since.
Yeah, it's tricky because for one, I think there's a stigma around that because when you think of being in a public toilet and then having to pull it out, empty it, you need to wash it if you're not in a toilet that has the sink in the stall. Like there's just a lot going on there. So I think
Mm.
for the segment that it works for, it really works for, but there's quite a barrier to entry
Yeah.
for lots of people there. And then they have like discs, they have reusable pads. So I think for folks that have like a much higher appetite around sustainability being much higher to their, number one purchase decision,
Mm.
they'll do those things. But in general, that's why we wanted to create like a mainstream sort of that had mass appeal, is to help convert the habits of more of the public because most of them they just want to use tampons and pads, and so we have that. And the idea was that if we are able to build a brand that develops that trusting relationship, we can then say, okay, now try these period pants. It might change your life, and we can introduce other things. But where I'm feeling like there's needs more innovation both in the conversation and in products is sexual wellness actually. And so really in the US is like quite a big conversation going on there. I think with the repeal of Roe v. Wade, there's just so much anxiety, rightfully so, around sexual wellness and reproductive health.
Mm.
At where, yeah, there's just more interest, more conversation, more change to be had there. And so that's sort of where we're focusing our own like NPD and innovation at the minute.
Do you think EXO is going to play a big part in that conversation?
We hope so if we have our way.
Oh
And
yeah, got some big visions for that brand. I think condoms is a bit of a weird one for me. If I go through all my experience, it's kind of I remember saying to you, well, because men mainly buy condoms, and you're thinking, no, they don't. And I was like, for God's sake, the one thing that they need to do, honestly, how are women getting stuck with it as well? But I think kind of again, if you think around education, I do really think there's something that needs to be done within our schools. And at more of a kind of formalized government level when it comes to just how we're educating our children in general, when it comes to their own sexual health, when it comes to you have the conversation about how to put a condom on. Everyone remembers the condom on the cucumber lesson where people were throwing them at the ceilings. We all remember that lesson. But then what happens after that? There's no discussion about what else as part of that process. Like that's just one part of it. I mean, I remember developing a latex allergy when I was younger and actually trying to, so like there's so many things where you just can't work all of those elements out. So absolutely, I think you're right. There's a much bigger conversation there. And I was really surprised to hear that actually in the US, it's probably a little bit further behind than the UK from what you've seen.
yeah, it's yeah, there's just so much stigma around it. It's really funny.
Yeah. So I could talk to you all day because there's so many different topics here. It's so interesting. But I have one final question for you. If you could give one piece of advice to all the marketers listening today, whether that's people wanting to kind of fly the flag in the way you guys have and really kind of embrace life's messy moments, and helping their consumers overcome it, what would that be?
So I think just engage authentically. So if it's not your authentic voice to be out here with bright colors and using humor and doing all these things, don't try to do what someone else is doing. Like you should have the conversation with your customer, understand their need, but find the unique way you can address that need because that's what is most powerful and will give you your superpower because you're doing something that no one else can do. I think probably more true for like the large corporate brands that all of a sudden are like, oh, we need to talk to Gen Z, and then they make some ad that is so cringe, and then
Literally, I feel like you've just seen into my day job right there.
right? And it's just like, oh, it's giving. No, don't do that. Like you have to find that root. And it might be that you need to make a concerted effort to genuinely engage with that. So that's why I'm saying if you never speak to anyone that's from the Gen Z generation, and then all of a sudden it's like, I'm gonna sell you toothpaste. Probably
Young
not.
people like cartoons. We'll put a cape on it. Woo!
So I would say like really lead with authenticity, whatever that is, and
Yeah,
really like spend the time to engage with your customers because that has been really our mission to always meet our customers in our community where they are, understand what the problems are, and figure out the way we can uniquely help them solve those things.
amazing. Thank you so, so much for your time. I could talk to you all day. I really could. It's so refreshing. And this has been an absolute pleasure. So, guys, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you have any questions for myself, or actually anything about life's messy moments in general, want to get in touch with anyone at the team at Here We Flow, please do get in touch at podcast@thepoolagency.com. And I'll see you next time. Take care.